I didn't feel old until Grace started talking about my childhood like it was a long time ago, and ouch. Hey, today we're kicking off a new series, and we're calling it Throwback. And we're going to look at some of the ancient wisdom from different decades, but also from way back in biblical times and what it means for our modern lives. And we're going to look at what we can learn from things that happened a while ago, whether that was just a few years ago or way, way, way back thousands of years ago. And we're going to dig into what that says for our own struggles and issues and lives today. But before we dive into that too much, I'm going to need your help identifying a few things from a generation a little bit before me, actually from my parents' generation and what they would have known and watched and seen growing up. And so I need you to help me identify a few of these pictures. First off, let's throw that first one up here. Who is this? Yell it out, just yell it out. Peter Pan, right? Peter Pan and the Lost Boys. And this is one of the great, probably most enduring pictures of friendship from the 1950s, right? Peter Pan and his friends, the Lost Boys, go on adventures, and he teaches them to jump off of buildings and kidnap children. And I'm not really sure why this was considered child appropriate, but it is one of the most enduring pictures of what friendship looked like, and it stuck with us. We still watch this video. I saw this video when I was a kid. This is Peter Pan. Let's go ahead and throw the next picture of 50s friendship. Who is this? Right? Yeah. You got Fonzie and you got Richie. Actually set in 1950 from a few years later, filmed in the 70s and 80s, or 60s and 70s. This is Happy Days. And so Happy Days tells us the story of one of the most famous friendships of its day. And so you've got Fonzie, this lovable but kind of sometimes rough around the edges guy, and you've got Richie and the Cunninghams and their family, and they kind of adopt him in as one of their own by the end of the series. Let's do one more picture of 50s friendship. Go ahead and throw that next one up here. Who are these guys? Anybody know them? Rat Pack, right? All right, I like it. All right, so there's a lot of people that make up the Rat Pack, but it's normally at least Sinatra and Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. and a couple other people slide in and out. This is one of the enduring pictures of friendship that starts in the 50s. And it kind of persists on through the 60s and the 70s. It's something that people have tried to resurrect, but these were a group of friends, comedians and actors and entertainers who were always egging each other on, always pushing each other towards the next step, sometimes making some pretty questionable decisions as friends, but always pushing each other on towards the limit. So all of these are different perspectives on friendship from the 50s. And they give us different perspectives on how we can be friends. See, some of our friendships are kind of like the Rat Pack, and we're always kind of pushing each other towards the extreme. Whether or not that's wise, we're always pushing each other towards the next step. Some of us have friends, and we are friends, like Peter Pan and the Lost Boys. And our goal is just to stay here, just to freeze here and never grow up and never change. And some of us have friends like Happy Days, where we're pushing each other sometimes to grow and change and become better people. So today we're going to look even farther back than the 1950s for an understanding of friendship. We're going to look back thousands of years, actually around 3,000 years, to this book called Proverbs. And it's a book full of wise sayings and kind of these short, pithy statements that teach us a little bit about our lives and our world. The book of Proverbs is full of statements that say things like, if you do this, this is going to be your result. If you live in a good way, you're going to have a good result. If you live in a bad way, you're going to have a bad result. Some of these are things that have stuck in our world and in our language and in our lives. Now, the book of Proverbs is often attributed to a guy named Solomon. And Solomon was supposed to be the wisest king who ever lived. His father was King David, the biggest, strongest king who ever lived in Israel's history. Solomon was supposed to be the wisest. And so people began to collect some of his sayings. Now, most of Proverbs is attributed to Solomon. A lot of it, actually, or part of it, was written by other people. So King Lemuel writes parts of Proverbs. Some of the Proverbs were written down, and we don't know who wrote them. They're just pieces of wisdom that have stuck with us over the generations. So some of these Proverbs teach us a little bit about friendship. I wanted to start with kind of an easy one to warm up to this idea. This is one of, I think, the most undervalued Proverbs. This is Proverbs 27:14, and it goes like this. Greeting a neighbor with a loud voice early in the morning is going to be viewed as a curse. How many of you are morning people? Now, how many of you are good people? Yeah. Right, if for those of you who are morning people, this is from the rest of us. If we haven't had our coffee yet, and if we're still kind of rubbing the sleep out of our eyes, yelling and singing and all of that energy is just not a beautiful thing, right? This is good common sense advice on how to make friends, on how to be a good neighbor. It's practical, it's useful. And that's part of the point of wisdom and part of the point of Proverbs, but that's not the whole point of Proverbs. See, here's the thing about wisdom. We don't believe that wisdom is just a good idea. We believe this is God's idea. We believe that wisdom is God's way of saying, this is how I intended for you to live. This is how I intended for you to treat one another and to act around other people. Wisdom is God's ideal for our lives. We have to choose it, but we're offered the path. So we're going to look at some of these proverbs over the next few weeks. And some of them are about somewhat insignificant topics, how not to talk too loud early in the morning. Some of them are about really important things. And so there are proverbs that talk about who you should marry. Proverbs about who you should trust for your advice. Proverbs about how you should spend your finances. Proverbs, and there's lots of them that we're going to go through today, about friendship. Now, friendship is really important. We talk about it in church a lot because it is one of those things that changes a lot of our life. There are studies that show that friendships play a crucial role in our attitude towards work. And so if you have a best friend at work, you're 7 times more likely to be engaged in your job. That lacks of friendships can predispose us to addictions. That friendship impacts our physical health. Now, we've talked about friendship before. We're going to go a little different route today because I want to look at a very specific role of friendship. And that's the role of friendship in shaping who we are going to become. See, friends shape not just how our lives are right now, but who we will become in the future. Author Tim Ferriss puts it this way, not a proverb, just a modern author. You are the average of the 5 people you most associate with. That's one of my favorite quotes because it's also something that I've seen lived out in my life. It's tempting to think that we have close friendships because we have close similarities with people. It's tempting to think that we are friends with people because we first have something else in common. And so you see groups of people that all like to ride their Harleys together or all listen to the same music or they all go to Royals games together. And we think they must have like lumped up around those activities. And sometimes that's true. But not always. Think with me here. Think about your friends. Think about when you became friends. Some of you laugh thinking about your friends. I'm sorry. Yeah, my bad, dude. Chances are, when you became friends, I'm guessing you didn't sit down and interview them and say, all right, do you like the Royals? Okay. And do you like Italian food? Right. And Gates is your favorite Kansas City barbecue? Okay, we can be friends, right? Like, most of you didn't interview your friends to decide whether or not you could be friends. Most of your friends are people that grew up probably around the same time in the same place as you or went to the same school as you. Maybe they worked in the same industry or the same area at work as you. Maybe their kids played on the same soccer team as your kids. Most of our friends start out as just people that we run into again and again and again, and little by little, we become closer and closer. It's not always that our likes determine our friends. Sometimes it's the opposite, and our friends determine our likes. Sometimes it's that we begin to listen to music because our friends share us really great music. Sometimes we start liking activities because our friends introduce us to these activities. Sometimes we choose friends based off of what we do, but a lot of times we choose what we do based on who our friends are. And I'm really grateful for that. Because I think of a lot of my friends and I look and go, where would we have ever met if I'd waited until we had things in common? But instead, I'm grateful for the things that my friends have taught me and shown me, the places they've introduced me to a different life and different activities. So often, instead of our likes determining our friends, it's our friends that determine our likes. Now, some of you are starting to put this together. This is very important. To the kids who are transitioning to new grades today, to the kids graduating from their Bible class today, this is one of those things that's going to direct who you become for the rest of your life. Who you spend your time with and who you are friends with is going to shape you. not just in peer pressure on individual things, but on every different aspect of your life. It's going to be impacted by the people that you choose to let in deeply into who you are. But that's not just true for kids. It's also true for their parents and their grandparents, for their neighbors, and for each of us here. Most of who we are is shaped in some way, at least a little bit, by our friends. So friendship is important. And the book of Proverbs has a lot to say about friendship. We're going to look at just a few of the many, many Proverbs today. We're going to move quickly through some of these to kind of warm up to the idea. So the first one is Proverbs 16:28. And that is, destructive people produce conflict. Gossips alienate close friends. Now, that seems kind of like common sense to most of us, right? Like, don't choose as your friends, don't spend time with people that are super destructive, that are super gossipy, because if they're gossiping to you about everybody else, guess what? They're gossiping to everybody else about you, right? So we realize this is some good wisdom here. Don't be friends with people who are going to share all your secrets and be destructive. So far, so good. Easy proverb. Another one here is Proverbs 18:24. There are persons for companionship, but then there are friends who are more loyal than family. And many of us get this. There are people that we spend time with and we run into at social gatherings, and it's fun to talk to them. They're good for companionship, but then we've also got those friends. And I think most of us, hopefully you've been lucky enough to have people like this, people that are so loyal, people that are so close to you. They're family. They're part of you. The book of Proverbs is full of passages like this, but none are as famous or perhaps as important as the next one, Proverbs 27:17. And this is where we're going to go today. I learned it as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. Now, when we're talking about iron sharpening iron here, we're talking about a very specific thing in the ancient world that everybody in the ancient world would have gotten. And that is the idea or the process of sharpening a blade, whether it was a knife or an axe, something that an ancient person would have used every single day. Now, most of us don't spend most of our time sharpening iron, but back in the day when you had to hunt and you had to use manual tools on a daily basis, this was a vital part of their lives. People knew how important it was to have sharp iron. See, we think that dull knives might actually be safer than sharp knives, but some of you who have maybe done a little bit of hunting have found out a dull knife is actually more likely to cut you than a sharp knife. A dull knife is going to slide off what you're trying to cut, and often it will bounce into your hand instead. And I know that because there's a scar here, and a scar here, and a scar here. Dull knives are dangerous. Sharp knives are important. So we're going to talk about this because this is a tactile, tangible proverb. And I think the author of Proverbs wanted to use very physical language talking about sharpening our friends. So first off, how many of you have ever sharpened a knife before? Maybe a kitchen knife? Any Boy Scouts? All right. So a little more than half of you. That's good. I wanted you to see what it's like, for those of you who haven't, to sharpen a knife. And so I brought in a knife from my house, actually a machete. Only at Tongi does the pastor use a machete for a sermon, right? I love y'all. My friend Patrick gave me this machete. And it was an old sugarcane machete that he used. He was a really kind of a rugged, manly guy. He lives down in Texas, and he goes camping a lot, and he has this really intense garden land out back. Patrick's a really rugged guy. This is a sugarcane machete that he used a lot. But when he gave it to me, I'll be honest, I don't run into sugarcane very often. And so this has kind of sat in my garage, and it is rusted for the last 5 years or so. It's not real sharp. It's not real useful. So what would I do to get this sharp? The first thing you do to get a blade sharp is you take down the rough spots. Use a whetstone or sometimes a sharpening steel, and you'll take it and you'll actually grind the knife over the whetstone with the intention of little by little grinding off all the places where this blade has stuff stuck to it, whether that's rust or just grime, the places where the metal has gotten a little pitted, the places where dents have made it so that this blade isn't shaped the way it's supposed to. When you sharpen steel, the first step is to take something and grind off all the stuff that's not supposed to be there. One of the roles of a friend is to act like that whetstone and to reshape us by grinding off all the stuff that's not supposed to be there in our lives. So Patrick, the guy that gave me this machete, was a pretty manly, pretty rugged guy. We met in seminary. We were actually part of a life group in seminary together. And Patrick had some fire in him. He was a few years older than me and a whole lot wiser than me. And he was one of those guys who I would go to for counsel, but also who sometimes would give me advice when I needed to hear it, even when I wasn't ready for it. And so Patrick one day sees me, and we've been talking, and I've been getting kind of whiny. There was a part in seminary where I was working a lot, and I was going to seminary, and I was getting it was a little overwhelming, and I was just fried. And so Patrick hears me complaining. And he hears me as I'm blaming everybody else. I'm blaming the professors, and I'm blaming my friends, and I'm blaming my job, and I'm just kind of getting to that point where I'm saying, this isn't worth it anymore. I'm just done. I'm over this. And Patrick is this super powerful guy, and he gets right up in my face, and he grabs my shoulders, and he gets right here. And I was a little terrified. And Patrick goes, "Hey, you are better than this, and God meant you for more than this. And this little whiny attitude you're picking up is not part of who God called you to be." And Patrick is shaking me at this point. And I remember sitting there thinking, am I about to get punched? Like, I was ready to start swinging. It would not have worked for me. He's a big guy. Like, he's the type of guy who gives out machetes as party favors, right? Like, he would have taken me. And he starts calling out the stuff in my life that needs to go and saying, you need to get rid of this. This little attitude is not part of who God made you to be, and it doesn't belong here. And little by little, he begins basically shaking the bad stuff out of me. One of the best roles our friends can play in our lives is to grind off the rough spots and to reshape our lives, to get rid of the stuff that's not supposed to be there so that we can look like the life God meant for us. So that's one way we sharpen a blade, by grinding off stuff. There's another, and I want to look at another way right now. How many of you have one of these at home? Sometimes we call them sharpening steels. That's not actually the name of this. It's a bit of a misnomer. This is actually called a honing steel. It doesn't sharpen things in the traditional sense. It doesn't grind off any part of the knife at all. Actually, what it's supposed to do is hone the blade. And so when you have a blade and you use it and it's already sharp, you find that right at the tip of that blade, those molecules sometimes get pushed just a little bit out of direction. That right at the very end of a sharp blade, right at the very tip, that it's easy for those things to just kind of get nudged in the wrong direction. The blade gets kind of misaligned a little bit. And the job of the honing steel isn't to remove rough spots. Instead, it's to realign those molecules, to nudge them back into the direction they're supposed to be so that they're sharp and they can cut through things again. The job of the honing steel is to realign things. And sometimes we have friends that do that. And they don't really have to grind off any big things or big problems in our lives, but instead their job is just to nudge us back into the right place. Not always just to call us out, but just to remind us, hey, it seems like you're kind of starting down the wrong road here. Before we get too far, let's pull back. It's the friend who's hanging out with you at a party, and they say, hey, it seems like this conversation's getting just a little bit away from who we are. Maybe we come back. It's the friend who calls you out and says, hey, it seems like you're getting a little angry. Maybe come back a little bit. So these are two ways that friends sharpen us. Sometimes by grinding off the hard parts, sometimes by just nudging us back into the right decision. I hope you've got a friend who does these things to you. Even more than that, I hope you are a friend who does this to others. Which friends are we going to be? Are we going to be like the Rat Pack? And when our friends are around, are we always going to be pushing them towards what we think is fun, even if it's not always the wisest decision? Or are we like Peter Pan and the Lost Boys, and we don't want things to change? We're terrified of growing up, and we want things to stay exactly as they are for as long as possible. And our friends are great right now, so let's never, ever change. Or are we going to be like Fonzie and Richie from Happy Days? See, some of you were Happy Days fans. It was a bit before my time, But here's why it's wisdom for the past for us. Fonzie's the guy in the leather jacket. And some of you know this. He's kind of a rough around the edges guy. He's a bit of a ladies' man. He's got a moral code, but sometimes he needs to smooth talk his way out of things. He's got this tough exterior. He doesn't let anyone in. But there's a reason for that. And it has to do with the fact that when he was a kid, his dad walked out on him. And his family's never really been there for him. And so little by little, this guy Fonzie has developed this swagger to protect a fragile interior. Some of you know people like this. He doesn't let anybody in. Until little by little, his friendship with Richie and his family begin to change him. And little by little, they begin to open him up. And little by little, he decides that maybe there's more to life than just this tough, fun-loving exterior. And one day, Fonzie decides it's time to get baptized. Now, Fonzie's family isn't there for him. And some of you have seen baptism, and it's just awesome to see a loving, awesome, huge family around somebody. Fonzie doesn't have that until Richie and his folks get up and love on their friend and become those friends more loyal than family. We need friends who encourage us and draw out the best in us. Friends who don't use us as disposable sources of entertainment like the Rat Pack. Friends who don't want things to stay exactly as they are like the Lost Boys, but instead friends who say, I want what's best for you, always and always. So I want to challenge you this week. Take a few minutes. It'll take less than 10 minutes. Think of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. Who are they to you? Are they your Rat Pack? Your Lost Boys? Or your Happy Days? And perhaps an even bigger question, who are you to them? So here's why this matters. Wisdom isn't just a good way to live. It's how God has called us to live. We have to choose it. But one of the most important things we can do to help us choose it is to choose friends who will walk with us along this path. Friends who will sharpen us and hone us like a knife so that we can live out the life that God has called to us. Christians weren't put on earth to sit like my machete in a garage collecting rust. We weren't put here with no purpose. Our job is to bring the hope of the gospel to the hurt of all people. That's our sacred mission. As the Tonganoxie United Methodist Church, we are all about inviting and connecting and growing and serving. We believe that God gave us this and God has called us to this. And we will give everything we have to do that and accomplish that. But to do that right, we've got to be sharp. To do that right, we've got to have friends who, as iron sharpens iron, will sharpen us. This is the role that I found in my life group. This is the role that I'm grateful for in many of you, and this is my prayer that you would find in your own lives. So as iron sharpens iron, may we sharpen one another. Let's pray.